We have done some introductions. I'm originally from South Africa, and I've been in Canada for 10 years. So I started 7 social enterprises in South Africa and Botswana, and most recently in Canada, last 10 years. Not that recent, but feels still recent in some ways. When I moved to Canada, I was doing my research for my master's thesis, and I was looking at how some of the practices for startups, particularly like lean startup and design thinking, were being implemented in the social impact space. What was working? What were the gaps? And through the research, I discovered that there were some challenges that were still really kind of embedded into the design of businesses, even for entrepreneurs that wanted to do better, wanted to generate impact. Some of them I've listed here below. And I'd love to say in the 10 years since I did my research that the current situation here has changed, but it hasn't really. And so we have impact startups trying to do amazing things and feeling quite constrained and limited. And so the Flourishing Startup Method was born out of my research 10 years ago. And I kind of did the first initial sketch of it. And the method is not a process. It's not a step-by-step thing that you should be following as a startup. What it does is it invites us to explore different aspects of our context and our experience. And when we do explore these things, they open up the possibility for us to move beyond our current situation that we're finding ourselves in. And so it's an invitation to explore. And since my research 10 years ago, I've been implementing this methodology. I've been using it as the roadmap for the design of programming, the design of my work with startups. We've been testing and iterating and pivoting and improving this methodology for 10 years. And I'm very excited to announce that we are publishing a peer-reviewed journal article on the methodology, which was just accepted into the Journal for Business Models and will be out for publication in a couple of months. And that's huge because it's been 10 years of research we've been gathering in order to get some really good credibility as well as challenges around how the method is implemented today. And so I'm going to now invite you to move over to the method. It's to the right of your screen in the mural. And we're going to be kind of working our way around the method over the next hour and a half. And you're going to be sharing your thoughts and ideas. And we're going to start off with the word flourishing. And then the exciting part about this is that I am going to be inviting my dear colleague, Karon, to answer some questions about her experience in each of these aspects of the method as an kind of a mini interview. And you're going to be also sharing your thoughts in this mural as participants. So really exciting format.
Well, it's more exciting for me. I didn't think I would be interviewed in the middle of this workshop. But thank you.
Amazing. I'm so excited to hear from you, Karon. And so let's start off with this word flourishing, which is very interesting. And I've had the incredible pleasure of working with Deborah on really exploring and unpacking language. And language is foundational to our ability to imagine new ways of doing business. Language implicitly and explicitly shapes culture, perception, and behavior. And if we think about business language today, it's pretty aggressive and a little bit violent, actually a lot violent. Headhunting, killing it, breakneck speeds, chopping block, executing, headhunting.
Wow.
And so we
I
go
don't
on. And
think
in
any
fact,
of us really thought of words like that in such a context, that how negative are those words really? Wow.
it's
Okay.
extremely negative, but it's also shaping our approach to business. Business is framed as if we're going to war. Those words I just mentioned are things that would happen when one was going to war with, say, native communities. And so this warlike rhetoric, killing the competition, I mean, that's one that we hear all the time, shapes and frames our approach to business. And I love this quote: the limit on my language means the limits of my world. And so deliberately and intentionally bringing language like flourishing into business is a pretty radical act. Not only is business language violent, but there's a lot of language that is being pretty deliberately excluded from business. Love, care, servitude, stewardship, wholeness. This is not language we hear in business. And so the starting point for designing flourishing organizations is an intentional and deliberate reframing of what we would like business to embody and the actions and behaviors we want to embody while in business, while doing business. And so there's our definitions of flourishing. And for us, this word flourishing enables a new goal and role for business. And this is foundational. And so I'm going to invite you all to, you can put a sticky note in the mural by double clicking. And there's a question, there's a reflection question here. What is my defining of flourishing, or what other words resonate with me to represent flourishing in business? And while you're all making some notes in the mural, I'm going to invite Karon to share a reflection with us. Karon, can you share your experience of the limitations of business language and what important language you've intentionally included in your work?
Thanks so much, Ondine, for giving this chance to talk once again about something that I'm so passionate about. You know, what we realize, and this is something that Deborah and me were discussing a little while ago, that the way we talk about business is obviously in economic terms, right? Everything is about the finance and money and economic. Somewhere along the line, there's been some kind of sensitization, and we started talking about socioeconomic, right? But if you think about it really hard, there is no word that tells you how to think about the third most important dimension, or the third dimension which is so important for our world, which is environment. There is no such word. And so we designed a word, okay, or we coined the word socio-environomic to say, to talk of a person, a leader, a practitioner, a learner, who's able to think along all these three dimensions at one time: social, environment, and economic. So yeah, I mean, that's my word to share, which for business users especially, I think is going to be a very important word to start using.
Thanks so much for that, Care. I think that share, sorry. I think that's really powerful, because I have been struggling with the silos that have been created between economic, social, and then, I don't know, somewhere the environmentalists are sitting on the side, but there's a real big disconnect. I guess they kind of sit under the banner of sustainability. But in actual fact, it's an integrated approach. And you're right, there's no term to talk about an integrated approach. And the word sustainability, I don't even know. If you ask me what the definition of that is, I have no idea.
So true, so true.
Amazing. And I'm loving that we're seeing some comments coming into the mural as well. And maybe, Deborah, I can invite you to share with us your take on the importance of language and reframing and being intentional about the language we are choosing to integrate into our business experience. If you don't mind me putting you on the spot. You're on mute, Deborah.
Thank you, Ondine. I think language is really essential for us to be able to really imagine new ways of acting, being, and thinking. It's really a gateway to new possibilities. And so I'm so excited to be co-creating with you in this space. And I think I'm so glad to give definitions of flourishing, because I think each of us, part of flourishing is having our own definitions, right? I think there's a real power in language to own what we mean by the terms. And so I think they're wonderful definitions, but I think each of us in our personal journey makes our own move towards flourishing, and it's different for everyone.
Thanks so much for bringing that up, Deborah. And for us, we not only need to own and explore and have agency around our definitions of language. The way we do that is to decolonize language, and we can be very imposing about language. And for many years, we imposed our definition of flourishing onto our startups and said, this is the definition of flourishing, right? And of course, through our own journeys, have realized that the pathway to flourishing and the pathway to understanding language is a journey anyway. It's hard to just adopt a cognitive understanding of language. You have to experience language to understand its meaning. And that is different for all of us. So it's being intentional about language, but also decolonizing the way that we impose language, or the space we create for folks to explore language. That is really important. Okay, so that's our first start to the method, is this definition of flourishing. I'm going to invite you to move across here to the right of the method. And we have our next little bit of the method. And here we see it in the methodology. It sits at the top, integrating the personal growth journey. And so when we were doing early research, we absolutely understood that, and this is so interesting, and I find myself having to shift my paradigm here a bit as well. We need to understand that business is the expression of those that co-create it. So business is merely the expression of those that design it and those that choose to support the business. So every time you make a purchasing decision, you're co-creating with this organization. We tend to blame business for things that go wrong in the world and the extractive practices that happen, instead of the individuals that designed that business. A business doesn't have a mind of its own. It's not making its own decisions. And yet the accountability kind of sits in this shell, and not with the individuals that are co-creating this business. And so we know absolutely that one of the most important things is not about designing the next innovative business model. It's working with the individual who is designing that business model, because the business will just be an expression of their worldviews, their attitudes, their desires, their values. And so in our startup programming, we've always done some pretty deep work around this integrated journey, the individual and the organization. And we were really surprised to continue to hear from participants how revolutionary this was. It's so amazing that we're working on a journey that's integrating our values into the design of our businesses. And we thought this was odd because leadership is not a new concept in business. But what we begun to understand was that leadership in business today takes a very capitalist approach to personal development, because it actually centers how the individual's traits and skills and gifts can be co-opted or better used to drive the business towards profitability. It's actually not about the individual's flourishing at all. And so this was very interesting, because what we've begun to understand is that this concept of separation, the business is here and we sit here, has created a very big siloed effect for individuals. Meaning, we've all done this. What you do in your personal life, what's happening in your world, you leave at the door when you step into business, into your office, into your organization, and you are then acting and expected to behave from a different place. And this is genius, because how else would business have been able to be as destructive and extractive and oppressive if we were all showing up to work fully embodied with our values of what's right, what's flourishing, what's, you know, what our well-being should be centered around. And so anyone in business today is, or anyone trying to create new businesses today, are operating in some deep silos. It's why we have people like Warren Buffett, who's the wealthiest man, one of them, on the planet, who's gained his wealth from some of the most extractive businesses, also being the world's biggest philanthropist. That's a silo. That's a huge silo. And so most entrepreneurs wanting to do things in the world today are deeply conflicted. They sit in this silo. When can I bring my values in? What do I leave at home? When can I imagine and think about flourishing? When do I need to step back from that because I'm told you can't do that if you want to earn money? And so there's constant tension and conflict that we're all experiencing by trying to build values-aligned businesses in a world that doesn't support values-aligned businesses, in systems that don't support values-aligned businesses. And these are the things, some of the things that our entrepreneurs have shared with us that they're sitting with in deep conflict. So why do we have conflict? Well, we're told that our mental models, the way that we think, have shaped current economic and social structures, which have then determined how we behave, and that is how we shape our business models today. And the kinds of economic and social structures that business is rooted in today are colonialism, capitalism, and patriarchy, as well as other systems. These are the predominant ones that we see as the foundations in which business is held within today. We think that model is not the truth, to be honest, even though that is what we're told. What we see is that the mental models of small groups of individuals in positions of power over many, many hundreds of years have been the ones that have shaped our economic and social structures, which then hold our or shape or frame our own mental models, patterns of behavior, and current business models. And somewhere there's our individual values, but we've kind of been fractured. There's a fracturing between our wholeness, our values, our inherent well-being, and the things that we're seeing being driven into the world today. And so if we're going to be able to imagine flourishing organizations, we need some significant systems change. And to be told as an entrepreneur that you have the ability through your enterprise that is rooted in our current systems and social structures to change the world is also not truth. It's not possible. We need to be able to imagine our businesses today from a very, very different place. And if we were able to have the root, the core for how we are imagining business as being whole human and values-led, and then being able to together co-create systems and structures that support whole human, values-led, flourishing mental models. This, of course, is going to change systems quite significantly. And those systems then are going to spark new patterns of behavior that enable the possibility for flourishing business models, which in turn turn into ecosystems and communities. And so, Karon, I'm going to welcome you back.
Always.
And I'm going to ask, how have you intentionally integrated your values into your work? How has this changed what you do? And what are things that you still find challenging having to operate in our current social and economic systems and structures?
Wow, I couldn't ask for a better platform than this to reinforce what we are talking about, Ondine. So thank you again. I think, the RISE values, everybody knows. I mean, that's really what I believed in, when I started both Idobro and RISE, because even Idobro, the colors of Idobro are the colors of the RISE values. So it is in every single thing we do. It's integrated in everything that we do. And so I think the RISE Pico World Summit came out of that. And then the RISE Infinity Foundation, where we work on peace building, also has come out of that, because I so strongly believe, again, in another word that I coined, which is practical peace. So I won't take too much of time, but I think it's quite visible how I've, kind of hopefully lived my values and brought them into my work as well. So thank you.
Awesome. And can you share, like, what is still challenging? I mean, it's one thing to have these flourishing values, and it's another thing trying to enact them in a context or in a system that is still quite extractive and oppressive by nature.
Right. So,
yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So I think one of the biggest pressures on entrepreneurs is always to prove turnover, because for everybody, growth is equated to turnover growth. So if you can't demonstrate turnover, it means you've not grown, or you've not scaled, or you're not successful, right? I'm going to give my own example. I mean, we are now 15 years old, but if you measure us in financial terms, we are pretty much lacking over there. And yet today we are, running a platform that reaches 9,000 people, 83 countries, and we're bringing together, above all, bringing together more than 100 partners to work together on one platform, really work together. The whole thing is co-created. I mean, without a huge budget, how do you do that, right? So if everything was measured in financial terms, then we would be totally unsuccessful. But if you measure it by what we are able to do and work together with other people, then I guess it changes the paradigm completely. And so not everybody understands that. And that's our biggest challenge. Not everybody understands it. They're like, tell us what to do and we'll do it. And when we tell them, no, it has to be co-created, they're at a loss because they're not used to that model. They just don't understand that model, you know. So those are definitely some challenges, but well, we're still on the path, 12th year.
Thanks for sharing that out. Our definitions for success within structures of capitalism are all centered on exponential growth. I mean, that is the measure of success. And what's really interesting about that concept is that growth, exponential growth, cannot happen on a finite planet. And that's not just resources that finite resources, but as human individuals, like how much internal resources do we have to give to this, the slave driver of growth and success? And that framing is an act of violence against the planet and us. And yet, Karon, as you say, in order to get funding, loans, support, all the things, if you can't demonstrate revenue and growth, you don't make it. It's interesting because it means, well, I'm curious. I would love for you as our participants to be popping in some of your thoughts into this mural. But if any of you have anything to share about that statement, I would love to hear.
I'd like to share, and echoing on what Karon said, and Ondine, the idea that how am I authentically aligning and living my vision and values from your personal life to your business or the work that you do. And when we started in this tribal village where I am right now, we said we want to do a non-profit organization that works on micro businesses to give women and communities livelihood in the villages. But it's so difficult to kind of put into root the idea that we are not for profit.
Yeah.
Everybody says, oh, I say, no, I'm not interested in profit. I'm more interested in giving people jobs or livelihood. And profit may happen, may not happen. But it's such a difficult thing to kind of assimilate right down in the organization, the staff, and the ecosystem, government, people, vendors, and everybody, that we are not really for profit. And the thing is that people then wonder, how are you going to grow if you don't make profits? How are you going to grow? And it's a challenge because I ask myself the same question. Okay, we want to do this, we want to grow. So how do we grow when when you're not keen on profits? So the thing is, we decided that we want to bring up the communities by giving them opportunities to work, to take home incomes, especially the women. We want to do that while preserving the environment. So our company vision is thriving communities and flourishing ecology. I just wrote that out there, and we use that word flourishing right in the beginning. And I told everybody that we should not be making the same mistakes that capitalists or business people do in the cities, and do the same mistakes here in the villages. So it is really navigating a whole new path of thought, of interactions with people, and trying to find your ways to articulate this to people. So how do you articulate these thoughts? It's a whole new paradigm of thinking that your whole presentation is about. Bringing human values into business is so strange sometimes. And so articulating it is a challenge. The words that you use, the language that you use, and bringing and filtering it down into a positive message in within the organization and even externally is a challenge. And so we are currently navigating this, and so I'm so happy that I'm in this presentation today, because it is exactly it resonates with us in my daily work here.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kenneth. And, I think the importance of this conversation, and we see this with our entrepreneurs, is being able to talk about how hard it is, to expose why it's so difficult, to not place the onus of responsibility on the entrepreneur thinking, what am I doing wrong here? Why aren't I getting it right? Why am I sitting in this tension? We found, because this is systemic, and so it's not something that we're going, we're perhaps collectively could shift, out of some of these social structures and systems over time, but right now we exist within them. The power here is to talk about them. It's to expose the limitations, the struggle, the tensions, to do some grieving around them. We find that when we open up this conversation in our startup programs and we talk deeply about how folks are feeling in these tensions and limitations, knowing I want to do something in the world today that doesn't fit with how we can be financially sustainable, being in community and talking about it and holding that space for each other is where we're starting to see some liberation. We have to talk about it. We can't solve it. We're not solving it in our startup programs, but the conversations are helping entrepreneurs to be in this space in a way that they're not feeling it's them, that they're doing it wrong, that they're not, somehow able to make things happen, and talking about the tensions they experience. I'm going to move over to Imagine New Futures, because I think this is a really, Kenneth, you helped to really give me a segue into this next section. And again, remember that the method is an invitation. It's this line of questioning. And when we dive deeply into the questioning, we can start to open up our thinking, our experience, our community of support, and perhaps create and imagine something new. So we know from our research that we cannot imagine new futures from where we are today. Because if we are to imagine the future from the current state of affairs today, most likely we are just reimagining what we have right now. And so how do we build flourishing organizations when we can't, when we have the same reference points as we have today? We need to think outside of the paradigms that are constraining us in the way that we want to design businesses. And so the research is very clear. We have to be able to imagine the future, new futures, if we're going to be able to move towards building them. So in startup programming, we asked our startups to imagine flourishing futures 30 years out, 50 years out. And this is what they came back with: the apocalypse. And we realized that it's not so easy to imagine flourishing futures. Number one, we don't have a lot of good narratives about it. If you think about every single movie set in the future, it's apocalyptic. Last 5 humans on the planet, killer virus, alien invasion, you name it. I mean, the planet is like destroyed and desolate. That's the image we have of our future. Now, not in all cultures, but certainly in the West, that narrative of an apocalyptic future is perpetuated. So we dived into the research. How can we support entrepreneurs to even be able to imagine flourishing futures? And the research tells us that we need imagination. We need to be able to be creative, to be able to think outside of our current narratives, to be able to see new futures. And so that's great, we thought. We started to introduce creative practices into our programming. We brought artists in, we did vision boarding. Let's get creative. And we didn't move very much further than the continued apocalyptic model. So diving back into the research, and Kenneth, you said this so beautifully, and that's why I love this little cartoon. What we've realized is that our current paradigms that are shaped by our social systems and structures, colonialism, capitalism, patriarchy as being the kind of predominant ones, mean that we believe this is how things are. This is how it is. And in the constraints of our current systems and structures, we can't really imagine flourishing. There's no space in those systems to imagine flourishing. Maybe if you're a multi-billionaire, you can imagine flourishing in that system. But certainly not for most of us, and most certainly not from the global majority, marginalized communities who are still being disproportionately oppressed by these systems. So what we believe is truth today is how we believe the future is going to manifest as well. And the scientists say that we're in a state of imagination failure. There's a word for it, which means in a state of imagination failure, to be able to have the space, the creativity to begin to step into that forest, that flourishing forest of a completely different paradigm shift, is almost impossible. And so we get, folks into our startup programs, we tell them to imagine beautiful futures, and most of us are in a state of imagination failure. Our ability to imagine futures is severely limited. And so what ends up happening is we perpetuate the same things as we're seeing today. Even if we're wanting to do good, even if we have a vision for doing good. And so how do we support this? Again, it's systemic. It's systemic, but there are things that we know help. The first is we have to bring in a lot of creativity and imagination stimulation into our work with entrepreneurs. And as entrepreneurs, I always tell the folks I work with, don't go and do another business course. Go and do an art course. That is going to actually put you in a better place for your business to be able to imagine new things and to innovate and to be more values aligned than another business course is going to do for you. The other thing we need is hope. And this is kind of tricky because everyone's like, yeah, I'm not talking about positivity. The definition we use for hope is, actually, I'm gonna quickly go to it because I realized I didn't put it on my slide. Hope is not the same as optimism. It's not the conviction that something will turn out well, but it's the certainty that something makes sense. It feels good in our bodies. It resonates with us. So it's changing. Like, none of us are, want to get delusional about this utopia of flourishing in the future. That's not what flourishing is about, but because life is hard and there's always going to be things, right? We're human. But it's about the fact that we are in alignment. Things make sense. We're not in that tension, that disconnection. The other thing that we can do is practice being in the future. And we do that by engaging in flourishing aligned speculative fiction. It's one way. Reading, learning about flourishing futures that these incredible authors have been able to imagine for us. Speaking to our elders, talking to communities that don't have a doomsday vision of the future. And we need equity justice and restorative justice, because we can't move into a flourishing future without deeply understanding how we can all benefit. And so EDI, we hear a lot about it. It's not something that sits on the desk of an HR manager. It's not things I'm seeing in business schools. It's not conversations I'm seeing being had in startup accelerators and incubators. And yet it is imperative to us to imagine futures, is to understand how we all thrive in these futures we're imagining. And I'll show you one more slide. This is, I love this. This is the Mocha Museum, Art Museum in Cape Town. They have literally broken down a silo to create an art museum. And I think this is so powerful, because when we sit in honest conversation in spaces where we can be creative, where we can imagine together, we start to begin to see futures that are more flourishing aligned. And so, Karon, I'm going to call you again. And here we are. If anyone wants to put some thoughts, what future is my enterprise creating? Karon, what future do you believe your organizations are creating? And what stories do you hold about the future that inform how you engage in the world today?
It's a very difficult question, because as you said, it's so difficult to even imagine something positive, right? It just seems so insurmountable. It just seems so out of reach. You just keep plodding your way, hoping and believing that you're going to get there, but you can't really imagine what it is you're going to be able to create. And you really stumped me right now. But I'm going to give it a shot. When we talk of our vision, and again, that's such a controversial word by itself when you talk about vision, right? Is we say a shared world, built on positive lives and peaceful societies. And because it's so hard to imagine what can be that positive life, or what can be that shared world that is so fantastic, I look at it as one person at a time. If I can touch the life of a single person and make it a little more positive, because I don't know how positive can I make it. What's the best positive that I can do? But if I go step by step and I can make every person's life positive and I touch it, then I think I'm achieving something. So the end result being that everyone whose life becomes more positive gets strengthened to in turn contribute towards a better society. Because if we are not strong, how can we contribute to anything else? And so that's the vision we have. And shared world, because we believe that slowly but surely, as you keep building stronger relationships, the hope is that those stronger relationships will lead to, again, positive lives, a kind of a virtuous cycle, so to speak, that, we will keep supporting each other, we'll keep building more positive lives, and more positive lives will lead to more peaceful societies. And so that's the shared world, if I might dream, would be that flourishing world that I would look at. Yeah. Thank you.
I really love that. And it is, because so much of the constraints that we feel are systemic, which makes it really challenging. But yet we're told as individuals we can do, we're told we can do it all. We can make a huge difference, and yet we're still in the constraints of where we are today. And so I love that, we take it from the systemic perspective, which can be quite paralyzing, into that individual perspective, and that collectively each one of us starts to reshape the world. Thank you for sharing. And we have Bhavana. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Hi, my name is
Hi.
Bhavna. I don't write it phonetically. Sorry about that.
No, that's great. I always like to check. My name is also tricky, so I get it.
All right. I have loved, I'm sorry I was a little late, but I have loved most of the conversation. Resonates with a lot of the questions that I am grappling with my enterprise. I am, to briefly tell you, in the world of caregivers and caregiving, and um, and one of the questions that I grapple with every day is how can care be measured, and how can that be monetized, and whether or not it can be monetized, and whether or not there can be metrics around it. So as I was listening to you, I was tempted to say, so one of the things that has been on my mind, and we actually spoke about it in the systems thinking plenary, and the theme that came up was we are solving for no poverty in our SDGs. And in solving for no poverty and looking at an economic frame, we may be creating poverty of time, skills, and compassion. Time, skills, compassion, and dignity. I thought it was a very interesting issue. So, on the converse, would be, you know, how can we not have poverty of not just economic resources, but no poverty of time, skills, dignity, and compassion? What it means is that we recognize wealth to be a composite of not just the money that you make, the economic resources that you have, but the time that you have, the dignity that you have, the compassion that you have, and the skills that you have, right? So, for example, in the world of AI, it is increasingly going to be valuable to have empathy and compassion, and it would be really something to have the poverty of that, right? So, how do we create exchange mechanisms across these different types of currencies, right? Today, we know how to convert a dollar to a rupee, but we don't know how to convert a dollar to an hour of empathy, or a quantum of empathy. It doesn't have to be an hour of empathy.
Yeah.
I'll just take a pause at that and say that I think it's good to have these questions, and it is good to wrestle with them.
And thank you so much for that share. So many powerful insights in what you shared. And I think again, it's stepping out. It's being able to take a step out of the constraints of our current systems and structures, so that we're able to imagine new ways of doing things.
Oh my God, I should share with you a paper that I have written with two other authors about what leadership looks like. And and it is inspired by one of the epics from Indian mythology. And actually, there is the other author, Raghu, who's written this book called The Five Seats of Power. Let me see if I can remove the blur.
I would love it if you could put that in the chat for everyone as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, that would be awesome.
And as you can see, it is full of my notes. Okay, so I will write it down. It's The Five Seats of Power by Raghu Anant Narayanan. And it is inspired by one of the epics in India, the Mahabharata. And while it's a very large document or a story or a collection of stories, the essence of leadership is inspired by the five princes and the archetypes of five princes in this story. And one of the princes who has the dilemma before the big war, Mahabharata is the big war, and engages with his intelligence, the divine intelligence within him. Krishna is the representative of the divine intelligence, and Arjuna has the conversation with his divine intelligence. And he here, of course, is metaphorical. It could be he or she, about taking a step in the middle ground.
Mm-hmm.
And imagine it to be the y-axis and a perspective looking at the x and y, the z-axis, the third dimension. So taking a step away from the existing system to be able to have a full system view and understand the tensions and the pulls and the pushes and the intended and the unintended consequences of the existing system. So you eloquently spoke about the consequences of the existing system, which is a mix of patriarchy and capitalism and what have you. Of course, it is very different from what it was intended to be. And therefore, how are you going to intervene and create shifts or disrupt it for a new design? Sorry, I've said a lot of things, some of which might be very little, very cryptic, but I don't know.
No, I think you've said it so eloquently, actually, and that's the barrier, is if we believe where we are in our systems is the truth and the way of being, it limits our imagination. It limits how we see the world. And it's our ability to take a step away, to step to the side, to step in front of the existing systems, have that full view is what enables us to imagine new things. And so that's what we can do to encourage entrepreneurs is support them to take a step out of the existing system so that there can be some open, creative space for imagining new ways of doing things.
Oh my God, you're validating me in so many ways. I didn't imagine that this session would be that, but I'm very grateful, because I often feel that I'm off to something that is odd.
Well, that's what I was saying earlier. Like, we're told that it's our fault. You're a bit off. You're radical thinking, we're constantly gaslit. Instead of, embracing and holding space for us to question the system. And it's through that line of questioning that our creativity expands.
Yeah.
Ondine, I'm sorry, I'm just coming in for a second.
Yeah.
Bhavna, why don't you put the stuff on the mural? Then Ondine will really have a lot of your thoughts.
Yes, I would love that. I've been taking notes, and I apologize if I'm misrepresenting anyone speaking, but I've been kind of putting notes in here, but please feel free to jump in and correct these stickies.
We've put the mural link again for those who may have missed it or not been there. So yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. Great.
Amazing.
Carry on.
Okay, so I'm going to move so you can see here. Look how provocative this methodology is. I love it. We've got integrating the personal journey. We've got imagining new futures. We've got this new language for business. I'm going to move into appreciating current contexts. Now, it's interesting, while we have to imagine new futures, in order to not design the same things that we have today, we also need to understand how we got here, where we are at, in order not to design the same things as we have today. And in the startup world, we spend the least amount of time in the space of historic context and current context. And it's a huge problem, because what ends up happening is that if we want to know where we're going and design new things, we have to understand where we've been. And so in my programming, I use this tool called the Impact Gaps Canvas, which we use with early stage entrepreneurs. They come with their brilliant ideas, and then we have them over 4 weeks complete this canvas, which is a systems-based exploration. And we have a saying in the program, no idea survives an Impact Gaps Canvas. Because if you truly understand the context of why we are here in this moment, in this shape and way, you end up really beginning to reassess how you're designing things moving forward. Because most of what you're designing is, in actual fact, just a perpetuation of what we're already seeing. And so why is it so difficult for entrepreneurs to be kind of in the present or looking historically? There's a couple of reasons. The first is the scientists say we're in a state of triple imagination failure, because in order to understand our current context, we have to have imagination. We need to be able to imagine what happened in the past, see things we can't see in our own experience, such as maybe like biodiversity loss. We talk about it, but if we can't physically see it, we have to be able to imagine it. And so again, creativity is so important in being able to understand historical context. You know, if I was to come and do work in India, I don't have context. I don't have lived experience. I will need my imagination and my creativity to sit, to listen deeply and to be able to understand context in order to do perhaps something in a co-creative way that's meaningful. And we don't see that happening. We just see impose based on what we see in the what we currently see today. The other reason why it's so hard for entrepreneurs to be in the now is because most entrepreneurs live in the near future. And this is the space of emergence, because you have this new idea, and what you're doing as an entrepreneur is you're projecting this new idea into the near future as you're imagining what it's going to be like, how it's going to be, you know, how it's going to shape up, and how you're working towards actualizing this idea. So we know entrepreneurs aren't living fully in a kind of integrated way in the far future, because we can't really imagine far futures. We know that entrepreneurs aren't really sitting in the space of history or current context. And so when you design a business that doesn't have future and past context, what's it grounded in? Where's it going? Where's it come from? And so this current context and the future is what grounds an idea in a place of context and gives us the opportunity to address things that haven't worked from the past and imagine things that we want to, new things we want to move to in the future. And so this current context is such a gap we see in startup programming, because if you go in, all you're doing is designing your near future business model. That's all the support you're getting, is what's happening in 6 months' time, how you're getting to profitability in a year. You're in the near future, ungrounded in context. So, Karon, I'm introducing another question for you. Are you with us?
Absolutely.
How has history,
Ondine, though I get scared every time you call my name, I must say.
every time, you're doing so great. How has history and current contexts inform your work today? And why do you think it's important for entrepreneurs to understand their current context systemically?
The questions get tougher, but I'm going to take again another shot at this one. For me, from a historical perspective, one of the things that, constantly I think about is that the whole development sector is very hierarchical. I mean, we have hierarchies everywhere. There is, yeah. But for a sector that believes in equity and equitable, distributions and relationships, etc., non-discrimination and all that, we are a very, very hierarchical structures. Yeah. So when we designed something, and when I say we, I'm talking about Idobro and Rise and Foundation, we always look for ways, because we say we are collaborating. So how can you collaborate? Can you really have collaboration between unequals? I don't think so. I don't think so. The relationship is more of, I'm asking you to do something, and therefore I will do it because I perhaps need to do it because you're funding me, you're sponsoring me, you're supporting me, so I will do it. And because of that relationship can never be of mutual respect. At best, it can be of respect. At best, not mutual respect. Right? Second part of this kind of a relationship is that there is always going to be a sense of who is more superior, right? And these are all at a positive side. Imagine, if I look at it negatively, then it's disastrous because there's no trust. The other end of the spectrum, which is totally negative, is there's no trust. And the best case scenario is that there is some respect. How can that, in any sense, be something that can be thought of as equitable, right? So for me, when I started thinking of how I want to design things and say that we are collaborating, my first thing was that we really have to co-own it. This is not co-creation. This is not, whatever, co-located and all those things. Yes, we should do it. But first start with ownership. If you can't co-own something, you are never, ever going to have equitable relationships or mutual relationships. So for me, that was the first thing. And again, the word co-ownership therefore becomes very, very important. Because think of it this way, right? When you buy something, you own it, right? Are you going to just say somebody else owns it with me so easily? No. And that's why the word co-ownership becomes so critical for me in that sense. And so when we design the structures, we created the ecosystem, as we call it, okay, which is where all the three stakeholder groups, that is the partners, the entrepreneurs, and the citizens, okay. I mean, that's a longer discussion for another time, what it means, but basically the three kinds of stakeholder, that's partners, entrepreneurs, citizens, all three have to own the ecosystem for it to become a ecosystem, for it to be a thriving, flourishing ecosystem. So I think, yeah, that's the historical perspective, and this is what we are looking towards. So,
Karon, thank you so much. That's such a rich share, and I think, part of, in my experience, the inequity and the I would even say ignorance of a lot of the development sector, and I'm from South Africa. I worked in the HIV world in Botswana for 10 years. Saw a lot. Is because we are not asking folks to deeply understand history that hasn't been shaped in a very particular way. And so many of the folks in the West, the development sector, have a really uneducated view of historical context. And we see this in the entrepreneurial ventures being born as well. Don't go to business school, work with artists, go to history class, and not history class in a university. Some provocative and real exploration of history. And then, to your point of co-creation, I'm going to jump into our final pillar of the method, which really speaks to this co-design. But we have our hands up. We have our provocateur. Please feel free to share. And I'm just going to, not to cut you off, but we do have 20 minutes. I'd love to get through the rest of the presentation. And so please share with us, and also put thoughts in mural.
Actually, I already put the thoughts on the mural, and I was just evoked to, I like to be called the provocateur, but I would say I was evoked to share with you something about an organization that I'm a part of. It is a process work organization. It's called Sumedhas, and one of the axioms is see the unseen, articulate the unarticulated, and act the withheld. I have written that on one of the post-it. Yeah. So it is a skill for the facilitator or the intervener to be able to see the unseen, articulate the unarticulated, and act that is withheld. And if you see the parallels, it will be the parallel, Karon, that we spoke with Arun in the systems thinking model that he has in his book, which is think of yourself as a systems being, see the whole system, so system thinking and systems acting. Okay. And there is a parallel with Raghu's book, who says, answer the questions: who am I? Why am I here? What is it? What is the alignment with the higher purpose? And in doing what I'm doing, what am I really doing? Yeah. So there are parallels in all of them. They're all saying something similar. But the key question also is that we are in the grip of a system. So I would like to also bring the fact that the grip of the system is so, like, it's a entrenchment of a very hierarchical masculine system in which a certain way of doing and being is better than another way of doing and being. Hierarchy is more important than collaboration. Making money is more important. And if you see the correlation with entrepreneurs are again and again taught to think about the burning deck, design for those products that the customer is willing to pay for. A painkiller, not vitamins. That's it. I'll take a pause because I can go on and on.
No, it's amazing. And I love the language that you're using. It's really making the analogies for me come to life. And thank you for sharing that. And I think what this appreciate current context and the future provokes us to do is, I often see systems thinking being applied in a very now place. We need to understand our system now, but we want systems thinking to expand time contexts. We want systems thinking to expand into the future, and our understanding of the world in systems to be historical too. So right now, most systems thinking is sitting at a point in time. And what we're calling for here is an expanse in systems thinking into the past and future. And those provide the context and grounding for us to leverage how we understand systems in the present.
Sorry, I would just quickly say that good leadership, as per indigenous Indian way of thinking, is what is relevant for 7 generations.
Absolutely, absolutely, and so and that stems out of indigenous wisdom.
Yeah,
systems thinking in time contexts. So I'm going to go to our final pillar here, and it sits in the middle: co-design and validate the near future business model. Now, this is really the only place startup supports normally sit, is building this near future business model and supporting the entrepreneur to do that. And Karon, you'll love the language here, co-designing.
Yeah.
And so in many kind of in the way that you're imagining your ideas, and in a lot of programming and supports we see for entrepreneurs, there is this adoption of planning approaches to this co-designing. And planning applies to establish procedures to solve understood problems within a very linear and accepted framework. And so the mere act of doing business planning in early stage startup design is actually very restrictive, but it also does not have mechanisms for co-creation. And so the way that we are holding our ideas as startups, and we're building and imagining them, we believe has to be more design orientated. Design inquires, it's open, it's collaborative. It opens the space for creativity and imagination. And so business design is really important. Now, I'm not saying business planning is not useful. It's useful at a particular point in a startup's journey. But in its creation and co-creation, it's not very useful. So if we adopt design practices, which are things like sketching, imagining, storytelling, understanding our bias, so recognizing how we engage and understand with systems, and then learning from those we serve in a co-creation in an equitable way, we start to be able to imagine very different types of business models. And that's just in the process we're adopting to bring new ideas into the world, can have a very restrictive or expansive opportunity. We've been exploring, and I'll move here first. We also have amazing tools to be able to support co-creative design and business models. So we use the Flourishing Business Canvas that asks some incredibly provocative questions around the things we're considering in our business models. And by the mere nature of the questions this canvas asks, engages in acts of co-creation. So tools, methods, processes that you're using to do the creating process are also important. And they should be intentionally chosen. And then when I look at what kinds of business models are we designing that are flourishing aligned, it's really interesting. And this slide is still in like rudimentary form because we don't really know yet. We have great examples of what flourishing business models are in the world today, but what we are seeing is that we know they have to be decolonized, and the types of business models that are best enabling the possibility for flourishing are sitting in the degrowth and post-growth movement. They centering local living economies. So Kenneth, this is probably where a lot of your work sits, bioregioning. And the difference between the pink and that blue is the paradigms in which those business models are being imagined. So blue, so even if we have social enterprises and B corporations and cooperatives, if they are being born from the from our current systems and structures as their holding ground, they're only ever going to, move to a certain point down the kind of flourishing spectrum. The kinds of business models we're seeing on the right are those that are completely reimagining our social and economic systems and structures in which business exists. Imagine building a business that is centered on degrowth. Kenneth, you mentioned this earlier, right? Very difficult. So in the co-designing, in the place that we're all working on our businesses, the intentionality, how we're designing and what we're designing for is quite important in helping and holding us in being able to shape business models. So Karon, my question for you here is, how are you co-designing your business model? How have you co-designed it? And have you seen any business models that are truly feeling very flourishing aligned in their design today with the entrepreneurs that you're working with?
So, I mean, I can only speak from my experience because honestly, we all design for what is expected, right? I mean, that is the typical way that business models are built. So I'm often asked where the Rise Speak World Summit is concerned, we have no sponsors. So if you see our partners, we say knowledge partners. There is no sponsor partner with us at all, right? And we don't ticket it either. So we have a very clear policy. We don't take money, we don't give money, okay? So how do you create a business model out of that? And I give a very simple example or a very simple validation of this, right? And I don't know if you call that a flourishing business model, and I'd love to get that insight from you. But I tell them if I had to organize an event of this scale, 100+ sessions, okay, crossing multiple cities, physical events, online, hybrid, all of this, alone by my own team, I would have to raise a fair amount of money, okay, to be able to do this, right? Because that's what it takes. It takes manpower, it takes resources, it takes time, it takes effort. Now, instead of going that route, which is the typical business model, because then I would be able to show that, oh, my revenue is so big because I raised all this money, but then I also used up all that money, right? Okay. And then I created something. But I don't know how much goodwill would I generate over there. However, in this business model where we co-create it with our partners, we co-own it together, we co-get the visibility together, okay? I am not the one who's responsible for creating 100 sessions. I have bought 100 partners together, yes, yeah. And I've created the platform, yes. But my partners take on, if they co-own it with me, they also are co-responsible for making it a success. I mean, Ondine, you've put in so much time and effort into this whole workshop. Such a beautiful piece, right? Now imagine if I had to organize it and tell you, Ondine, please come here and do it for me. Just all that effort that you put in, I would have to do it. I'm not for 1 minute saying that any of us are taking advantage of each other, because we are providing the platform. We are providing some, that's the co-creation, right? We are providing the platform, we're doing the technology, we're doing the communications, we are doing the design, we are asking you to look at your part of it. And so because it's a co-ownership model, okay, I don't have to go down the typical route of saying I need sponsors, because without sponsors, I'm never going to be able to host this event. And mind you, we're doing it for 12 years. People kept telling us, you're never going to be able to do this. It's never going to grow. It's never going to scale. It's, you'll never get senior people. You'll never get global speakers. I mean, I don't know how many times I've been told all of this in these 12 years, right? But I think today we are proving it again and again. So I don't know if this is a flourishing business model, but I can only say that co-owning it has definitely made my life, I think, a lot more easier, simpler, and much more satisfying, because, the amount of goodwill that we get and the great people we get to also meet with this. Yeah. So
Thank you so much for that. I would say that's so flourishing, right? And again, it's not, who are any of us to judge flourishing? As Deborah said, it's about defining it for ourselves. But if it's resonating, if it's aligned, if it feels non-extractive, if it's there's equity and mutual respect and trust, I mean, that's flourishing. So, just and I feel it too. I've been asked to do presentations. I've been, asked to collaborate and contribute. The whole process of being involved in Rise has felt very different, just even from the way that things are structured. So I've been asked to do many things, and I don't feel always great about it at the end. I feel like it's been quite extractive. We've all been in those scenarios. And so I think what you are creating is something that feels, inherently to me, I was really, really excited about showing up today. And I don't always feel that way in presenting the work. So thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing. And so I'm going to wrap up before we just open for a few more questions, just to talk about what we've done here today. Is we've journeyed in the middle of the Flourishing Startup Method. We've gone into all these little places here. But there's a couple of things that I haven't spoken about that I do want to mention. The first is, what are flourishing competencies? What are the things that we need today that help us to be able to sit in this space of new business creation? We've identified 3 core competencies we need. Flourishing leadership, which is leadership in servitude of an individual's well-being, the well-being of a community, the well-being of our planet, not the well-being of the organization. If the well-being of the individual is met, the expression that they can give to the world is the construct of an organization. Systems thinking. Yes. Contextual, future, past, present. And design. Creativity, imagination, co-creation. And then the other 2 things that sit on the side of the method, and they kind of hold the method. They hold the space that this method is being explored, is community of support. We have to do this together. Doing this as an isolated individual is brutal. It's incredibly hard work. And very joyous work. And being in community to walk alongside each other is incredibly important. And so the intentional communities that we're setting up to hold this work have to be really well held and designed and really intentional. And the other side of what holds this method is our internal environment. The somatic work. How are we responding to everything that's happening externally? How are we holding it? And so in our startup programs, we're doing somatic practices. We're doing nervous system regulation. We're teaching entrepreneurs how their internal mechanisms work so that they can exist in the world in an integrated and well space. They can do this work from a place of wellness. We're holding intentional communities of support, and we're infusing these really liberating questions into the design of their business journeys. So, if we're designing organizations from a place of wholeness with flourishing visions in communities of support and regulated bodies, as opposed to silos, constraining systems and structures, and dysregulated nervous systems, not grounded in context, what is the difference in the types of organizations we're going to see in the world? So with that, I'm going to shut down my share. And I know we only have 3 minutes left. I want to thank everyone for your participation and just for witnessing this work, for showing up. People always ask, like, why don't you record your sessions and just put them out on the web? Because for me, the reciprocity in my work is the witnessing people turning up and giving some of their time to witness what I've done. And that for me is my act of reciprocity. It feels like an act of reciprocity. So thank you to you all.
Thank you so much, Ondine. You have really put time into this, and I know that for a fact, and we're just so grateful. I, for one, have definitely taken a lot. I think Kenneth has said the same thing. He's feeling so affirmed. Bhavna said the same thing. She feels so validated. So I think it's been incredible. I do want to ask Deborah to say a few words, because I think she's, again, co-authoring the book with you. And, I'm so grateful to her for connecting us and getting us together. So Deborah, maybe you can have the last word and then we can close. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing. I think you've opened up so many new possibilities and opportunities. And I really appreciated all of the comments, all of the ideas. Ondine and I are putting this together as a book, and we'd love to talk with you more. All of the things that people have said I've jotted down, and we'd love to get your perspectives and share your perspectives and explore new language in the lexicon of change. So please share with us any additional thoughts that you have. I welcome the chance to connect on LinkedIn if we're not already connected, and putting that in the chat. And thank you, Karon, for creating this flourishing summit, and Ondine for just opening up so many windows and possibilities for us. Absolutely affirming and wonderful.
Great. Thank you. And with that, I think we close for the day today. So yes, go have a great day. And for the rest of the let's call it a day. Thank you very much.